Hello and welcome to this webinar from the State Archives Collection Museums of History New South Wales. My name's Wendy Gallagher and this webinar is about the theatres and public halls. I acknowledge First Nations peoples of the various lands on which we meet. I acknowledge First Nations peoples as keepers of languages and cultures that enrich our connection to country. As the oldest knowledge holders and first record holders and archivists of cultural heritage connected to the lands we live and work on today, I extend this respect to all First Nations peoples and elders past and present. Theatres and halls come in all sizes and shapes with a broad range of facilities and purposes. They can be very simple, like the Railway and Tramway Institute Social Hall at Dubbo on the bottom left, to the more substantial and ornate theatres shown here as well. Above the Dubbo Institute is a seating plan for the Wagga Wagga Capitol Theatre, and beside that, the toilet plans for the Antrim Movie Theatre in Kiama, plans for the Empire Dance Pavilion and Theatre at Tweed Heads, and below that, the Broken Hill Ozone Open Air Movie Theatre. Theatres and public halls are often at the heart of communities, providing places to gather and sources of entertainment. Many are privately owned and run, which makes these records unusual in a government archive. We hold them because governments regulate, and the New South Wales government has been regulating public gathering places for a long time. From as early as 1828, the New South Wales Parliament legislated to regulate both the content of entertainment as well as the place where the entertainment took place. Any house, room, building, garden or place, covering all possibilities. Persons frequenting unlicensed premises were deemed to be rogues and vagabonds. A number of acts followed, leading to an act in 1897 called an Act to Consolidate the Acts for Regulating Places of Public Exhibition and Entertainment. This in turn was replaced in 1908 by an act called an Act to Provide for the Licensing and Regulation of Theatres and Public Halls and Places Used for Public Entertainments or Public Meetings, to license and regulate the holding of public entertainments and public meetings in temporary structures, to repeal the Public Entertainments Act 1897, and for purposes consequent thereon or incidental thereto, which is a really catchy title for an act. This is just one part, so it's section 14 of the Theatres and Public Halls Act from 1908, and it's about the governor's ability to put in place regulations as to the conditions of issuing or renewing licenses for theatres and public halls. And so it sets out pretty clearly the sorts of thing that basically the government was concerned about, that these buildings would be in suitable situations and construction that was appropriate, that there was provision of sufficient means of exit from any such building, that there would be methods for providing in any such building for the prevention and extinguishing of fires, and a whole range of points about how that matters and where it was applied, the amount of airspace and ventilation in all places in such buildings, and the sanitary conveniences and sanitation of the building. So these requirements are quite detailed and specific, and the correspondence between the New South Wales Government Department responsible for this Act, and that changed over time, and the owners or operators of public halls and theatres across New South Wales document the history of these buildings, sometimes in minute detail. The Theatres and Public Halls Act led to the creation of a series of files, NRS 15318, files relating to licences for theatres and public halls. This is where all of those documents about the licensing of premises used for public entertainment and public meetings were filed. Licensing was primarily concerned with the approval of building plans and specifications, so you will find some plans on these files, building inspections of new premises as well as licensed buildings at regular intervals, and correspondence with various bodies and individuals re aspects of public safety, such as the Board of Fire Commissioners and the Police Department. So there's a whole range of government agencies involved in this process, as well as the provision of technical advice relating to legislative and departmental licensing requirements. This might sound dry, and it can be, but the letters and forms are windows into theatres and the towns they're in and the people that are involved. It's a big series, so there's over 7,000 files. All of the files are listed in the State Archives catalogue at mhnsw.au. Some theatres have multiple files as they went for a very long time, and these are often a lot of paper for each file. Searching is really easy. Just go to the website, mhnsw.au, click on Explore the State Archives, and then type in NRS-15318 and a place name or a theatre name. These are some of the results from doing that for Blacktown. Blacktown returned 29 files. These 7 files show part of the range of venue types covered by this series. So there's restaurants, theatres, cinemas, halls, both private and public, high schools, a wide range of places. With well over 7,000 items, a list of files itself serves as a resource about these public places. They're more than just theatres and public halls. They served many purposes and many types of organisations. So it's everything from roller skating rinks to cinemas to Masonic halls to all of the RSLs scattered across the state, literary institutes, which were very common, town halls, restaurants. The open air theatre at Broken Hill is just one of many open air venues across New South Wales over time. A quick search in the catalogue found over 50 open air venues. And again, they vary. There are open air theatres, dance halls, skating rinks, stadiums, cinemas, even an open air town hall. The same names are used over and over again, particularly for theatres, with Civic being the most common with 97 results. But Royal, Roxy, Empire, Century, Lyric and Capitol were also very popular. Institutes, which are usually halls, are found in many towns and serve a whole range of purposes and groups. So there are railway institutes, mechanics institutes, transport, memorial institutes, literary institutes, by far the most common sort, and working men's institutes. This list of requirements is from the standard form police officers had to complete during annual inspections. So it's, again, lots of points to be covered. And it's going back to, is the building still substantial and fit for purpose? Is there proper sanitary conveniences for both sexes? Are there fire retardants applied where needed and fire extinguishers available? If they're used for the exhibition of moving pictures, that's a separate section. Needs to be filled in about frequency and other details. Are there exit lights over all of the exits? Do the exits open outwards? And if there's fixed seating, does it comply with the provisions? So here are 2 examples of that form that's filled in annually for each of the theatres or public halls. If the hall or theatre showed pictures, they recorded the frequency. At Beechwood in 1939, that was about once a month by travelling show. And the travelling show brought their own biograph box to show the theatres. And in Kiama in 1953, it was about 3 times a week. And if you look further down the images at Beechwood, there's no fixed seating. Hall used primarily for dancing. Seats are arranged around the halls. Whereas at the Picture Theatre in Kiama, there's fixed seating, and that's 192 in the gallery and 783 in the stalls. Sometimes there were quite serious problems found. The report from Constable Gudgeon on the form says the hall is a very large hall with supper room underneath the dance floor, making it awkward for patrons attending if supper is on. So this is about the Kiama Odd Fellows Hall. His August letter then sets out in more detail this and other problems. Dancing apparently raised dust that dirtied people's clothes. The stairs between floors are difficult. The suppers can't be left out overnight as the rats eat it. And the supper room is damp and dusty. Despite all of these problems, it was frequently used and very popular. The inspection forms and other correspondence from the local police officers provide insight into the work they do and also into them. Constable Gudgeon mentions that these things are being said to him as he's going about his business throughout the town of Kiama, so that people don't come in and make a complaint. Just whenever they encounter him, they make a complaint. Staying in Kiama, here are some examples from the files themselves. Kiama was a hive of activity in 1923. On the right is a letter from Ministers Weston and Colley of the company Kiama's Own Pictures to the Minister of Public Health, dated the 2nd of January 1923. So that's in the purpley type font. Below that, in black, is the referral to the Inspector General of Police for urgent inquiry and report, which is then referred on to the local police. Mr. Weston and Colley's letter is quite interesting. It starts by saying, "We've been contemplating the building of a picture theatre in this town for some time, but so far have been blocked through not being able to secure a suitable one frontage site that would meet the requirements of the regulations of the Theatre Act." We took these to be hard and fast regulations, but apparently they've been waived as Mr. A.G. Carson of Kiama has submitted a plan to the Kiama Municipal Council for permission to build and already commenced building operation for a theatre, the plan of which provides for only one court. So the court was where people spilled out into from the exits, the fire exits, about 10 feet wide or less, and exceeds the in depth twice the length of the frontage. So they needed there to be access to get away from the theatre, not just outside the theatre should there be a fire. As we can get a slightly better frontage than his, will you be good enough to advise whether you will approve of the same concessions being extended to us as have apparently been extended to him? For evidently they have, as we cannot understand anyone foolish enough to commence building a theatre without first obtaining departmental approval of the building to be erected. Well, that is possible. So in reply, Sergeant Blagrave replied saying that he hadn't been able to be out on duty because he'd been lame, so did not see the works had started, although he had previously directed Mr. Carson to the government printer for a copy of the regulations. And then there's the letter from Alex Carson demanding a man be sent to Kiama to explain how he has to have the courts and the exits. So he had indeed started laying foundations on the supposition that it would all work out all right. The atrium was built and completed in June 1924, later becoming the Kiama Cinema, seating over 900 people. It changed hands a number of times and was still there until at least 1972. This is from the file for the Ozone Theatre at Broken Hill, and it has this amazing list from the 1930s of all of the theatres with their licensed capacities. There were a lot of theatres and halls. I added up the licensed capacity, and that's 16,550 people, which is a lot of capacity for a population of 25,000 to 30,000 people. The photo is of Broken Hill a little bit earlier than that, in the late 1920s, possibly to 1930, from NRS 549 photograph albums of Mr. L.G. Watt. On that Ozone theatre file, there's a second list of theatres from the 1950s. And by that stage, only the Crystal Theatre, the Hillside Theatre, Johnson's Picture Theatre, Metropole Picture Theatre, and Ozone Theatre still existed. Here's some more imagery of the Ozone open air theatre. So where it's the elevation of the corner, so that sat above the building on a corner block, and the other two of the interior surroundings. So you would go in and sit down in this amazingly decorated open air theatre. There was a small fire in the open air theatre in 1960 where some debris had accumulated around one of the exits, and then a major fire in late 1961 with the indoor section, because there was both an indoor and outdoor section, being totally destroyed and the open-air theatre badly damaged. The remains were eventually demolished in 1963. Looking at something that's not a theatre, so this is a typical other use for a public hall, Surf Lifesaving Club house at Pambula. This description, the file covers 1967 to 1979, and the description is from 1967. The fee for a licence in 1967 was $2. So the planning tells us all about the hall. The hall, which is approximately 50 foot long by 30 foot wide, is entered from the eastern side across an open patio. Situated in the southwestern corner of the hall is a 14 foot by 11 foot kitchen and a 14 foot by 11 foot office. Attached to an opening off the southern end of the hall is a 30 foot long by 10 foot wide dressing room for men with shower cubicles and toilet facilities, consisting of one WC and a 4 foot flat back urinal. Attached to the southern side of the dressing room is a large boat shed for housing the lifeboat and surf life-saving equipment. So absolutely everything that's required for the lifesavers and what they were doing. But when the club decided to have it licensed as a public hall, because it's quite a substantial building, they found there was a whole list of improvements required, including changes to the exit doors, to the exit lights. The seating needed to comply with the requirements. They needed to get non-flammable curtains. They needed fire retardant paint to be used in certain areas, and they needed firefighting applications. This is the plan that they put in with their initial application, which pictures the scene beautifully with the Pacific Ocean breaking onto the surf beach. In 1947, they were still having issues with the recharge of fire extinguishers. One of the letters said, with a great tone of resignation, "This has not been as easy to effect as one would think." It was really the fact that Pambula is not near any larger centres. They eventually found Eden Fire Brigade could and would refuel them for the club. But by 1975, they decided they no longer wanted to be licensed as a public hall. The Beechwood School of Arts is another classic example, I think, of public hall in rural New South Wales. Beechworth is a small town about 5 miles, or I should say was a small town, about 5 miles or 8 kilometres from Wauchope. The correspondence highlights the difficulties of travel in New South Wales and the changes over time with additional services being provided. So you can see from that list, so this is just a little bit of a chronology about the hall. In 1930, it was being used enough that they decided to add a supper room. In 1939, they were approved to show films. You can see from the letter, here's a letter from Sergeant Third Class Taylor who's stationed at Wauchope, to the inspector in place of West Kempsey. And they're talking about should it be licensed to show films. He's reporting that the nearest picture theatre premises to the Literary Institute Hall, Beechwood, is Wauchope, a distance of 5 miles. There is no means of transport between the two localities during the hours pictures would be shown, and the only means of transport between the two centres is by cream lorry during the day. In 1947, the hall was wired for electric light. In 1949, police state they can't inspect the hall as a motor vehicle would be required to get to Beechwood, and there wasn't one available. In 1950, they were no longer showing films, but in 1952, they were showing films fortnightly. And as you can see in the excerpt, moving and talking pictures, but only respectable ones. And that Wauchope is 5 miles, theatre is 5 miles away, and per bus once weekly, and add in the cost of the bus. The School of Arts was still in use and having changes made to meet the regulations in 1980 when the films finish. The Capitol Theatre at Tamworth was one of a number of theatres across New South Wales managed by JK, Capitol Theatre Company. At its height, the company managed theatres in Wagga, Tamworth, Armidale and Moree, and there was 2 theatres in each of those towns, as well as 1 theatre in Inverell and Young. These are the plans for the Tamworth Theatre in the 1930s. So quite a substantial building and one of two that was in that town. By 1946, Hoyts was advising the Theatres and Film Commission that their company had taken over the JK Capitol Theatre Company, and all of those theatres were still in existence at that time. Throughout the files, there are samples, mostly of flame-proof screen material, sometimes of curtain material. This is a letter from the Fire Brigade to the Chief Secretary's Department confirming that this was indeed flame-proof screen material. The regular inspection reports often report the result of testing of curtains as being free burning, so you can see why it was important to do this work. This is a slightly worn image showing the Capitol at Tamworth in its glory days. The Capitol Tamworth, like so many other theatres, no longer exists, having been demolished in 1985. NRS 15318, files about the licensing of theatres and public halls, is the primary source. As we've covered, there's much communication with the Board of Fire Commissioners, and the Board of Fire Commissioners also created correspondence files relating to inspections of theatres and public halls. So this material also exists and can be seen at the State Archives. And there are some additional but less, perhaps more informative records from the agency that created the NRS 15318. The picture here is from NRS 4481, the Government Printing Office file showing the burning of Prince of Wales Theatre in 1872. The other thing that these files are absolutely rich in is letterheads, mostly from theatres, but also from the people that they dealt with. Or in the case of the Kiama Oddfellows, where they've asked their local member to write to the Chief Secretary on their behalf to try and expedite their licensing. I think Leonard's is an amazing, evocative of its time, but Silverton Tramway Employees Club is that other side of between entertainment and support for local people in the sorts of things that they do.